Every NBA season presents us with a small group of teams that are believed to have a chance of competing for the championship, as well as an even smaller group that is looked at as favorites to have deep playoff runs and ultimately win it all. However, there are also a few surprises every year. Some of them have to do with the team exceeding expectations, as was the case with the Miami Heat last season, but others have to do with teams coming way too short of their goals, and the Los Angeles Clippers fall into the second group. However, heading into the offseason, it was expected the franchise would try to do everything within its power to improve its chances to win a championship. But now that the dust is settled, it's fair to question whether the Clippers fell behind in their quest to win their first championship. Welcome to Courtside. Today we're talking about whether the Clippers will be able to keep up with the other contenders in the league. By now, it's common knowledge among basketball fans that the youngest team in Los Angeles has been all but successful since its foundation as the Buffalo Braves. In 50 years, the team has only made 15 playoff appearances, and more than half of those have come in the last decade. However, despite its many disappointing seasons, the Clippers have never gone through such a successful period as the one they've enjoyed in recent years. The turnaround started with the acquisition of Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan, and Chris Paul between 2008 and 2011, who established a formidable core that became known as Lob City. The trio was joined by head coach Doc Rivers a few years later, and with him, the team turned into one of the most competitive organizations in the league. The Clippers went into the best run in franchise history, and many believed they were capable of competing for a championship. However, they never managed to figure things out and failed to win more than a single playoff series despite having one of the best rosters in the league. The underwhelming results led to a rebuild in which all of their core players moved to a new team, either through a trade or via free agency. But even despite losing their key pieces, LA managed to remain as a solid team, and it soon became clear the front office planned to make substantial additions in the open market. So, when the time became right, they made their move. In the 2019 offseason, the Clippers shocked the world by signing reigning Finals MVP Kawhi Leonard, while also making a blockbuster trade for MVP candidate Paul George. The moves came at a high cost, but the team was able to keep some of its most important players such as Montrezl Harrell, Lou Williams, and Patrick Beverley. So by adding two superstars to that core, they suddenly had one of the deepest rosters in the league as well as one of the best perimeter defenses, or at least that's what it looked like. From start to finish, the Clippers were barely able to use their best players at the same time. Most of them struggled with injuries throughout the season, and in the case of Kawhi, his load management treatment always made him miss some games from time to time. As a result, no one had a chance to see how the roster would look if it consistently played at full strength. Still, given their amount of talent, as well as the fact they remain close to the Lakers and the Nuggets for the lead of the Western Conference, most people thought it would only be a matter of time before they were able to get healthy and figure things out. But as it turned out, that was never the case. In fact, despite having over 4 months to prepare themselves and rest their bodies, once the seeding game started inside the Orlando bubble, the Clippers failed to establish a rhythm. Some of their key players were dealing with coronavirus, others had to be absent from the team for a few days as they had to address personal or family matters, and a few others suffered injuries in Disney World. To make things even worse, some of their players struggled with mental health issues inside the bubble, and Paul George, in particular, talked about how difficult it was for him to perform at a high level while dealing with depression. Still, the Clippers were believed to be too talented to lose a playoff series before the conference finals, and for a few games, it looked like they would be able to live up to the expectations. After taking a 3-1 lead in their second-round series against Denver, they lost 3 games in a row and were eliminated before having the chance to play against their Staples Center rivals. When asked about what had been the reason behind their poor performance, everyone talked about the lack of chemistry and consistency, saying how they were never able to develop a rhythm during the regular season. As a result, the team reached an agreement with Rivers to relieve him of his duties as head coach, despite only having guided the new roster for 1 season. To replace him, the Clippers promoted assistant coach and 2016 champion Tyronn Lue. However, they were also expected to look for pieces that could help them address their most glaring concerns during the offseason. Despite having multiple scorers and wing defenders, Los Angeles had 2 large holes in its roster: a big man capable of going against the elite centers and forwards in the league, and a point guard who can be the primary ball handler and create plays for his teammates. So before the trade moratorium was lifted, it was believed the front office was forced on acquiring a playmaker. Multiple reports described the team's interest in household names like Russell Westbrook and Chris Paul, as well as in more reasonable players like Derrick Rose and Rajon Rondo. However, both Paul and Rondo were quickly out of the market. CP3 was traded to Phoenix despite seemingly being interested in returning to LA. And in the case of Rondo, most people thought he was a lock to join the Clippers, but the Hawks made an offer he couldn't refuse, and now he's part of Atlanta's roster. It also seems like the franchise was not interested enough in Westbrook and Rose, as the former is now headed to the Wizards, while the latter remains part of the Pistons roster. So without any other floor general available at the moment, the Clippers decided to move to the next stage of their search. They had more success addressing their big man issue as they were able to sign Serge Ibaka, who is one of the best two-way centers, and had one of his best all-around seasons while playing with Leonard in Toronto. team also managed to add Luke Kennard via trade and Nicholas Batum as a free agent after he was waived by the Charlotte Hornets. However, those were the last moves the team has made to date, and while both players look like solid additions coming off the bench, it doesn't look like they helped to fix the team's issues. Instead of taking the roster to the next level, the additions seem to keep the status quo. In the case of Ibaka, while he should be able to help the interior defense improve while also creating space with his shooting ability, his addition doesn't seem to have that much of an impact since he'll be replacing both Harrell and JaMychal Green, who decided to leave the team in free agency. And the same goes for Batum and Kennard, since they will probably be tasked with replacing the production of both Harrell and Landry Shamet off the bench. Well, while the newest Clippers will be able to provide some additional defense as well as more playmaking off the bench, it still doesn't look like they may be able to help the team get over the rest of the contenders in the Western Conference. Neither Batum nor Kennard will be able to create plays for Leonard or George throughout most of the game, and Ibaka may not be capable of stopping players like Anthony Davis or Nikola Jokic during a 7-game series. If we also take into consideration that teams like the Lakers, Blazers, Suns, and Jazz all got better during the offseason, that the young cores of both the Mavericks and the Nuggets should keep improving, and that the Rockets may be the greatest wild card in the league, it's not clear whether the Clippers made enough changes to keep up with their rivals. But does that mean they should be no longer considered championship contenders? Not at all. Any team that has as much talent as they do should remain in that conversation. However, they will no longer be considered as favorites to win it all, and that may be beneficial for them. Knowing that both Leonard and George will have the chance to become free agents after the season means the Clippers will already have a lot of pressure on their shoulders. If we add the fact they'll be playing under a new coach and the ghost of last season's collapse will be hunting them, it's safe to say they'll face a lot of criticism whenever things go wrong. But not being expected to win it all could help them out. In the years before the arrival of Kawhi and PG, the roster played well despite being considered an underdog, and it was often capable of overachieving. However, last year's roster had a different approach to the season. The players often displayed a cocky attitude, and George recently talked about how they didn't even try to fix their issues during the series against Denver. Instead of holding each other accountable and trying to improve to close the series out, the players acted like they would win the next game based on their talent alone, and such overconfidence ultimately allowed the Nuggets to make a historic comeback to win the series. So with that in mind, we can conclude Lou will be the X factor for the team heading into the season. And while some may argue that he was already part of the coaching staff that failed to keep the team focused in winning against Denver, he's already proven he can do wonders for a championship contender as the head coach. After all, he managed to guide the Cavaliers to the 2016 championship after taking over head coaching duties in the middle of the season. But what's more important is the way he did it. Lou was capable of putting LeBron James, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Love in a position in which all of them would thrive, and the team would also be able to take on anyone. And of course, instead of losing after taking a 3-1 lead, he led his team to a comeback in the finals after being down 3-1. In short, the Clippers didn't have the most exciting offseason in the league. And while some analysts consider they have fallen a step behind the competition, the truth is their biggest challenge will be figuring out how to give a proper use to the players they already have. If Lou finds a way to make both George and Leonard effective at the same time, and if the roster is healthy throughout the season and manages to develop some chemistry, Los Angeles could at least make it out of the second round of the playoffs once everything is said and done. But what are your thoughts on the Clippers offseason? Do you think they'll be able to improve over last season's collapse? Let us know in the comments. We hope you've enjoyed today's video, and if you did, remember to like it and subscribe to our channel for more NBA content. We are Courtside.